Hello folks, J. Scott Phillips here, and tonight we are bound for the final frontier with a look at Star Trek The New Voyages, edited by Sondra Marshak and Myrna Culbreath, and it was first published by Bantam Books in March of 1976. And this is my first offering to the Summer of Trek this year, which is a now annual BookTube event created by Vin at Revenant Reads, and he has a whole command crew of co-hosts helping us all out to be reading Star Trek fiction and other Star Trek adjacent books for the summer, for the months of June, July, and August. I'm getting a little bit of a late start this year. What else is new? But we still got a couple of months yet to go, so I'm hoping to do a few of these Star Trek videos here. And I've done a few in the past, and I'll leave a link down below. I've got a playlist that I started to collect them all in. So I'll add this to the list, and then if you're interested in seeing some of the other ones. I've been kind of going in order, chronological order, as Star Trek books have been published. So just kind of it's kind of fun to do a cross-section that way. I may start jumping around at some point, but anyway, that's the way it's set up for now. Now, I should start off this video here by saying that I'm recording this on the eve of July 4th. So the sun has just gone down. I was waiting for my neighbor next door here to finish mowing his lawn, and he got that all done just in time for the sun to almost go down. But it is the night before the 4th of July, and I live in a rather festive neighborhood, let's say, so we may be dodging some fireworks here as we're going through it. Hopefully it won't be too bad, but we might hear some going off here and there in the background. Tomorrow night, this is going to be in the middle of a war zone. There's just going to be fireworks up in the sky, on the ground, all around. It would be impossible to do a video for this tomorrow night. So I'm trying to get this done now, and then we'll get back to business after the 4th of July. So anyway, happy 4th of July, everybody. And now let's get on with the matter at hand here, and that is Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Star Trek The New Voyages, edited by Sondra Marshak and Myrna Culbreath. And like I said, this came out in 1976, early 1976. Now, I grew up watching the original series during its original broadcast on NBC, first runs, and was a huge fan of the show. I was just a little kid. But then by when the 70s started to roll around, Star Trek was in syndication and was really becoming popular. And Bantam Books started to publish the Star Trek adaptations of the TV series episodes written by James Blish. And those were kind of trickling out through the early 70s. And those were great. All of us Star Trek fans back then were collecting those, couldn't wait for the next one to come out. Each one had 6 or 7 different episodes, maybe 8 episodes to a book, just as short stories. And those were great, but they weren't original stories. We didn't have, this was back in the days before streaming or anything, we did have Star Trek in syndication, but what you had to do back in those days was sit down at the TV every night at 6 p.m. and watch whatever episode they served up. You couldn't just watch Star Trek, whatever episode, how often ever you wanted, like you can nowadays. But we were glued to the TV every night and watched those same episodes over and over and over and over again. Could never miss an episode, but you wound up memorizing them, basically. But there was never anything new anymore until, when was it, 73, I think? It was 1973 when they came out with the animated series. That was a Saturday morning cartoon show. And by that time, I felt like I had kind of outgrown watching Saturday morning cartoons, but I was a dedicated Star Trek fan at that point, was invested, so I had to sit and watch those. And I have to say, as far as Saturday morning cartoon shows go, they were good stories. Everyone always likes to say how good the stories were, and they were, but they were so short, and they were performed so I want to say, at least to me, it always seemed like the actors, and they had all the original Star Trek cast performing their original roles. But it just seemed like they showed up and were just kind of phoning it in. They had this sleepy music that was playing in the background, and as good as the stories might have been, the performance and the execution of those episodes just, well, it was early Saturday morning, they were just putting me back to sleep. They were only half an hour long, so I dutifully marched through them all week after week for those, year and a half that those were on. And then Alan Dean Foster started to have his adaptations of those published by Ballantine Books, I think they were. So we were getting Star Trek books coming out, but there was nothing new. They were all adaptations of things that we'd already seen. And like a lot of Star Trek fans back then, I was just hungering for new adventures, new Star Trek episodes, new Star Trek stories. Give me some books with something new in them. I was not aware in those days of the fanzines. I don't think I came across any of those all at the time. I've come across them since at some conventions and things, and then some got circulated around. But this was years later. I was not aware of fan fiction, Star Trek fan fiction, back then. But then one day, I was up at in 1976, early 76, I was in college at the time, up at the local Pickwick bookstore at the Orange Mall. And there was Star Trek, The New Voyages. It popped up there with this really cool artwork with the Enterprise flying by some weird object in space. And so I grabbed that up, and it said on the cover that it was original new Star Trek stories. So naturally, I just snapped it up, ran home with it, and then was kind of, I have to say, disappointed when I found out that this was fan fiction. Now, it had been edited and the stories were cleaned up, and the stories were mostly okay, but they all seemed derivative of, they were all kind of playing off of themes that were familiar. There wasn't a lot that was actually new in it. The stories were new, but they echoed a lot of the early episodes and had reference back to the early episodes, those kinds of things like that. And it was all fine. It was something new, and at least there was some, new publications being generated at that time. So I was happy for that. There was one standout story. We got a little firework there. One standout story in it, and we'll go into that. And so just to kind of get the ball rolling here, we'll talk about how this book came to be, and then I'll kind of give a quick overview of the eight or nine stories in the book. And then I'm going to focus on two. Well, we'll get into that in a minute. But first of all, here's where the book came from to begin with. So in the early 70s, our old pal Frederik Pohl was the Bantam Books Star Trek editor. And so he had been working with James Blish to be putting out these adaptations that were coming out every year or so, and was waiting for Blish to write an original Star Trek story to kind of follow up his first and only original Star Trek novel, Spock Must Die. He was going to be writing another one, and it just wasn't coming. The adaptations kept coming in, but Blish himself was getting sick. He was had a developing illness, and was having his wife help him write those adaptations more and more. She was not getting the cover credit quite yet on those. She would later on. But for now, he was churning out, along with his wife, these adaptations and kind of putting off doing the follow-up to Spock Must Die. But around 1975, when Pohl was really expecting, we need a new something new for Star Trek, it was James Blish who actually is the one that died, unfortunately. So now, all of a sudden, there were going to be no new Star Trek novels. There were not other writers in the wings in those days. Blish was kind of a one-man show other than with his wife in the background. But around this time, there was Jacqueline Lichtenberg, who was an aficionado of the world of Star Trek fans. And she herself was a fan fiction writer of Star Trek stories and had developed a series known as The Craith, some Star Trek fan fiction that was getting some popularity amongst the fanzines that were out there, being independently printed and circulated. And she was putting together a collection of essays and articles and other musings, some catalogs of fanzines and fan fiction, just all for the fans and about the world of fans, and delving into what are now that Star Trek is off the air, what are the creators of Star Trek up to now? What's in the wings? What's coming up for Star Trek, if anything? We've had the animated series. Could there be another TV show? Could there be a movie, perhaps? What is going on? What could be going on? The potential of Star Trek, and it was all generated for and by fans to get the popularity of Star Trek continuing and then flourishing in the future. Very optimistic. So she was putting together this book and shopping it around to several publishers. It came across Fred Pohl's desk, and he didn't buy it at first. None of the other publishers were interested either. He was looking for original Star Trek fiction. But now that he was coming to realize that he wasn't going to have James Blish to depend on anymore, he was looking for something. And here was something that was in the works, and let's see what happens. So he got in touch with Lichtenberg, and they said, let's put this book together. And Blish decided they should call it Star Trek Lives. Now, that's a lot of background here. That's another story. But when that book came out, it sold really well. Again, unexpectedly very well. And Pohl thought, well, now maybe we're onto something here. Anything that we put out with Star Trek is just money in the bank. So that book did generate interest in the world of Star Trek fandom. And part of that book was going to be some catalogs of fanzines and some select short stories that had been written by fans for those fanzines. And that got cut just due to length. Wasn't going to fit in the book. But now that's where Star Trek The New Voyages comes in. Sondra Marshak had been a contributor to Star Trek Lives, and after Star Trek Lives came out and it was doing so well sales-wise, that she pitched the idea to Fred Pohl about, let's take some of those original Star Trek fan fiction stories, the best of those stories that we started to collect for Star Trek Lives, and this can be its own book now with the proper editing and oversight. These stories can be brought up to a professional level and released on the Bantam label here. And the studio, who's still had an eye kind of on the side here looking at things, they'll be happy with it. And we can generate new Star Trek fiction fairly quickly and keep the wheels rolling for this show that we all love, that we don't have anything new for otherwise. Pohl thought this was a great idea, but he wanted something fast, so he gave Marshak 30 days to put this thing together. We need this book in 30 days from you. So Marshak had been working with who became her co-editor on the book here, Myrna Culbreath. And so they collected these stories and made all the contacts and inroads as quickly as they could, and started to edit these stories, and staying up late at night, editing them down, chopping them up, rewriting parts of it. Some of the authors agreed to have their stories published, but they didn't have time to edit them themselves. So Marshak and Culbreath said, well, we'll do that for you. We've got to get this thing going. And most of them agreed to do that. And so this book got all put together rather quickly. Now, at the same time, Culbreath and Marshak had connections with the studio. They had some relationships with Gene Roddenberry and some of the original cast members. And so Pohl asked them if they could reach out to them and see if they could get Roddenberry and other cast members to write introductions to these stories. Each story was going to kind of focus on a different character or aspect of their department or something. Could we get the appropriate actor for that character to write an introduction for that particular story? And so they made those inroads, and all the actors agreed to do this. And so they got these introductions from them. Although it's probably more likely that they submitted some ideas or something, and then just like the rest of the book, Marshak and Culbreath edited and rewrote all of those introductions and put the book together as a nice seamless edition. All right, we'll try this again. Sorry about that, folks. I got hit with a sudden barrage of fireworks, really loud, just like right outside the house here, maybe out on the curb or something. I had to kind of wait for that to die down, and hopefully it has stopped. We'll see. Now, you might be able to hear in the distance some other fireworks going off. I do live in Anaheim, 5 miles from Disneyland, and it's about 9:30 right now, and the Disneyland fireworks are going off. So if you hear some popping and muffled explosions and things, that's pretty typical, but I don't even hear those anymore. Hopefully you can't on the video. But this next section here, I wanted to talk about the contents of the book. There are 9 fan-written entries for this book here, and I'll just go through them real quickly as a synopsis here. But then I'm going to focus on 2 in particular, the first story and the last story, because I happen to have some original fanzine examples that then we can kind of share and contrast those to the edited versions in the book, along with some of the artwork from the fanzines for those stories. But let me just go through these little synopses here real quick. The first story in the book is called Nevar by Claire Gabriel, and it's introduced by Leonard Nimoy because it's a very Spock-centric story. It's kind of derivative of The Enemy Within, and in this particular story, it's Spock who gets split into 2 different people. One is 100% Vulcan, and the other is 100% human. And then how does the Enterprise, Kirk and everyone, deal with that? We'll get into more detail on that one. That's one of the 2 stories I'll focus on here in a couple minutes. But the next story, the second story, is called Intersection Point by Juanita Coulson, and it's introduced by Jimmy Doohan because this is a kind of a Scotty-centric story here, and it's set in engineering, and it's about the Enterprise colliding in space with a dimensional rift. So it's that intersection point between one dimension and the one that the Enterprise is in, and it's breaching the engineering hull, and things are getting sucked into it. And one very important piece of equipment, a tool they need to repair the ship and to cut off this interdimensional rip, has been sucked into the other dimension. And so someone is going to have to go in there and retrieve it. And they don't know what's in there. They can't see into it. So kind of an exciting story, and we meet a few of the other engineers, and we see how they all work together, what's going on down in the engineering hall when we're not privy to things going on behind the scenes down there. The third story is The Enchanted Pool by Marcia Ericson, and it's introduced by Nichelle Nichols. Now, this is not an Uhura story, but it does have a female character in it, and I guess we'll just call her Spock's nymph. Spock has gotten trapped on a planet. He's trying to recover a secret weapon, a Federation weapon that was being ferried by a shuttle from another starship and has been lost on this planet. He's trying to recover it, and the Klingons are nosing around. They're after this thing, and Spock gets trapped down there, and he meets... like I say, we'll just call her Spock's nymph, just a little petite fairy-like woman who is clothed in nothing but leaves and twigs and things that she has gathered from the woods in there. And she is desperately trying to communicate with Spock, and Spock is he's just a big dumb dope in this thing, and he does not understand her poetic language and what she's really trying to communicate to him about this thing. It's kind of a fun story, and it has a bit of a twist ending here, and you'll just have to read it to know what that's all about. The next story is Visit to a Weird Planet Revisited, and it is by Ruth Berman, and it's introduced by Majel Barrett. Not a Nurse Chapel story, but the introduction is credited to her. It's kind of a spin-off or a follow-up to another story that had been written in a fanzine that I haven't been able to read, but it was called Visit to a Weird Planet. And that story was about Kirk, McCoy, and Spock, I think, and they're beaming down to a planet, but when they... or beaming up to the Enterprise, I'm not sure which it is, but when they return to the transporter room, they're actually on the transporter room set at Desilu Studios, the real Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and find themselves on the Star Trek set, and apparently hilarity ensues. This story in this book here is the reverse of that, where William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and DeForest Kelley are filming a scene, and they're running late, and they're screwing up their lines and things. They finally get back on track, and so all of a sudden they find themselves getting kind of dizzy, and they reappear on the real Starship Enterprise in the transporter room during a Klingon attack. Or maybe it's Romulans. Doesn't matter, but they've got to then pretend that they're actual characters, and they know the characters well enough to try to bluff their way through. Shatner's really good at it. Nimoy and DeForest Kelley are trying to fake it as best they can. Very fun story. Then we've got the next story here is The Face on the Barroom Floor by Eleanor Arnason and Ruth Berman, and it was introduced by George Takei. Sulu has a bit part in this, but it's not really a Sulu story. And this story was kind of rough to get through. It's a shore leave story. Kirk and McCoy and Sulu are going down to this planet with a city in it that reminds me a little bit of the Wolf in the Fold kind of a thing. They're just out carousing, and Kirk kind of breaks off from McCoy and Sulu to kind of go have his own adventure, and he winds up in a barroom brawl and is arrested and thrown in jail. And he's not wearing his uniform. He bought some weird samurai costume, antique samurai outfit that Sulu thought was interesting. Kirk goes out, he buys that thing, and he's wearing that into town for some reason and gets in this fight. So he's got no Starfleet ID on it. He's thrown in jail, and no one believes that he's the captain of the Enterprise. They think he's just some drunk guy who got in a fight, lock him up, and in the meantime, the Enterprise gets called away on an emergency rescue mission, and they're trying to get the crew back from shore leave. Kirk gets left behind, and how does he deal with that? I think it's played for laughs, but it just didn't really land quite for me. Anyway, moving right along here to the next story, The Hunting by Doris Beetem, and it's introduced by Sondra Marshak and Myrna Culbreath. Sorry about that, folks. More fireworks going off here. But the next story is called The Hunting by Doris Beetem, and it's introduced by Sondra Marshak and Myrna Culbreath. They're not in the story, but it's another shore leave story. And this one is Spock and McCoy go camping together, basically, on this wilderness planet. Spock is really, his intention is to perform the Mach Far, which is a Vulcan rite of passage where he needs to go through this ritual in order to achieve or be considered a true Vulcan adult. And it involves capturing this wild, dangerous beast and mind melding with it and controlling it that way. And so McCoy goes along just to make sure that Spock's not running around in the wilderness all by himself. Spock captures, what is it called, an owl tiger, vicious beast on this planet, melds with it, but something goes wrong, and Spock and the creature exchange enough information that once the mind meld is broken, Spock becomes an owl tiger mentally. So he now becomes a predator, and now McCoy is trying to not lose Spock, but not get attacked by him either. And it kind of rambles along like that. Not one of the best stories in there, but enjoyable in its own right, I guess. But inventing some Vulcan lore that we hadn't heard of before or since anyway. The next story is called The Winged Dreamers by Jennifer Guttridge, and it's another shore leave story. This one is kind of a combination of shore leave and this side of paradise. The crew beams down to this very beautiful, lush planet, and they find that as they stay down there, somehow they are becoming hypnotized to see all these illusions and things and not want to leave. Everything they ever want is there on the planet. There's no reason to ever go back to the ship. And sounds pretty familiar. This one was a kind of tough to get through. Interesting in some ways. There are some interesting explorations of some of the characters and how they deal with illusions and not get fooled or get sucked into it, whatever. But the story itself, pretty familiar. That one was introduced by DeForest Kelley, because McCoy has a kind of a large part in that episode. And then the next story here is Mindsifter. This is the second story that we'll talk about, and it's by far the best story in the book. It was written by Shirley S. Maiewski and introduced by William Shatner. Very Kirk-centric here. This is a story of Kirk getting caught by the Klingons, and they run him through their Klingon Mindsifter that we saw in the original Klingon episode, the first Klingon episode we ever saw, introduced the Mindsifter. And then we never saw the Mindsifter in any of the other iterations, as far as I know, of Klingons in any Star Trek franchise ever since, which is a shame because it's a pretty deadly weapon that's so Klingon focused. They use it on Kirk in this story, and Kirk falls back in time and winds up in a 1950s insane asylum with amnesia. We'll talk about that more here in a minute. And then the very last entry, sorry about that again, folks. No fireworks this time. It was just, I just stumbled over my own tongue here. Getting back to here, this is the very last entry in the book here, and it's just a short poem called Sonnet from the Vulcan, Omicron Ceti 3 by Shirley Beech. And there's no introduction from someone from the cast on this one here. It's just the poem. It's just a silly little thing, really, but it is touching, and it's about Spock's experience in the episode This Side of Paradise. And so now let's get into, already at this point, the meat of this video, when I was going to focus on the two stories, the first one being Nevar. All right, the first story we'll talk about here in depth is Nevar by Claire Gabriel. And Claire Gabriel wrote her own fanzine called Quartet, and it typically would have 4 short stories in it that she would write all the stories herself. And Nevar was from one of those issues of Quartet. And apparently it resonated with other fan fiction writers, and the term Nevar got picked up and used by a lot of other writers back in those days. And the term Nevar is never explained in the story itself. Neither the edited version in the book or the original version in the fanzine, and I've got a copy of that old fanzine here. But it is described in like an introduction in the introduction in the fanzine, not part of the story, and then again in the introduction by Leonard Nimoy, supposedly by Leonard Nimoy, in the book. And Nevar is supposedly a Vulcan term that means to form, and it means anything that has sort of 2 aspects, a yin-yang kind of a thing, and bringing them together as a whole, but these 2 things are separate, and there's a balance and yet a separation between these 2 disparate aspects of anything, you name it. In this case, it's going to be Spock, because he gets split into 2, human and Vulcan. The way it happens is a little odd, and a lot of the aspects of the story are a little odd, really, but not the point of the story. The point of the story is just to explore what it would happen if Spock were not the hybrid, the half Vulcan, half human character that we've always known and loved? What if he was split into two? 100% Vulcan, purely logical, no emotions, and then the 100% human, which we all can identify with, but they're split apart. And how does the crew deal with that? How do the two Spocks deal with it? It reminded me a lot in some aspects of Blish's Spock Must Die, where Spock is split into two people, just like Kirk was in The Enemy Within, one good and one bad. But in this case, the split doesn't result in a good guy, bad guy thing. They're both good guys, but one is just completely Vulcan, one's completely human. And now that they're split apart, what's that relationship between those two characters now? They're different characters, but they're the same guy. They have all the same memories and everything. They just diverge at the point of when this technology separated them. And so the two Spocks come to realize that they have all their lives learn to depend on the other for something. The Vulcan always depended on the human half for certain, what would you say, just insights and things to connect to humanity. And the human half always relied on the Vulcan for that control and everything. And only now that they've split apart do they realize that they have been these two different, not entities, but two different philosophies or something, maybe in combat with each other, but also in a harmony somehow. And that's explored pretty much in depth in this story. And it's interesting because it also examines the friendship and the loyalty with Kirk. Kirk it realizes something is wrong. Nobody on the ship knows that Spock has been split into two. It's kept a secret for a while. Kirk starts to suspicion something's wrong. He just sees these two different Spocks, never seen at the same time, acting so differently and rapidly. Just mood changes and behavior changes unexpectedly and unlike anything they've ever seen before in Spock. And Kirk starts to realize subconsciously that he has been split into two different people. And so the Vulcan Spock is on the bridge performing his duties one day, and Kirk just feels, he starts to suspicion something. So he goes down to Spock's quarters, and he thinks Spock is in there, even though Spock is working on the bridge. Something is calling to him somehow on some subconscious level, and he doesn't want to just barge in. So he just puts his hand on Spock's cabin door, and he just feels like he can hear Spock saying, "Not yet, my friend, not yet." Some kind of a telepathic link that because of their long-time association, they have that rapport. So Kirk respects that, and he goes back, and then he tells the Vulcan Spock, who is obviously the Vulcan version on the bridge, I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear a word he said. That's kind of a callback to another episode. But that means that the human Spock was down in his cabin. And here's one of the little flaws in the story here. How can the human Spock be communicating with Kirk telepathically if he's the 100% human Spock? So there's little things like that pop up that don't quite make sense. But Kirk is also trying to communicate with Spock, "Let me help." That old line from City on the Edge of Forever. Let me help. He just feels bad for Spock. What can I do to help you? We're such good friends. You did the same thing for me when I was split into two, the good and bad Kirk. I've got to do something to help you, but what can I do? And it's ripping Kirk apart, and the two Spocks, literally ripped apart, are trying to now work together to solve this whole thing. So Vulcan Spock and human Spock are working together for their own sake, because they realize they have to be rejoined, but almost more to help Kirk get through this thing. So there's this pretty rich dynamic, this chemistry between Kirk and Spock, the three of them, somehow. really interesting. The plot line is a little odd. There's a scene that was added in by Claire Gabriel because she felt like this story might be possibly considered to be just any story of two very close friends on a spaceship out there, and one of them is split into two components. Didn't seem to have enough Star Trek to it, so she threw in this scene, this episode, where the ship is taken off course. They've got to go to a planet, and Kirk is going to have to go and perform some diplomacy to rescue some of his crew that have gone down there on a archaeological expedition or something, to keep them from getting eaten by the people that live on the planet. It seems forced in there, but it was put in there to make this specifically a Star Trek story. There's some other little oddities about that in the story. But like I said, I have the original fanzine version of it, as well as the edited version in the book itself. And I have to say that the edited version is a much better constructed story, tightened up. It's got to be only half as long, if not shorter. A lot of superfluous scenes are removed. The original story starts off pretty well, but it's really kind of inflated and padded. And then towards the end, during the resolution of everything coming together, just gets really confusing as to which Spock is which and who is Kirk talking to when they're trying to get certain things done and all that. And it's just very confusing. But both of them end with a quote from a Kipling poem, and anything that ends with a Kipling poem, I'm going to be a fan of. And I've got it written down here so I can recite it to you. It's from the Thousandth Man, and it's a scene towards the end of the story where, for some reason, the Vulcan Spock he's worried that the next morning they're going to refuse the two Spocks together. Vulcan Spock is worried. He doesn't know that it's going to work. Human Spock is kind of carefree about it. This is going to resolve everything. This is going to be great. It's going to work. More Kirk-like, really, in his optimism, and Spock is brooding about the whole thing. And Kirk is standing between the two of them the night before this traumatic remerging of the two Spocks. And he puts a hand on each other's shoulders, and he could just sense there's a kind of a circuit, I guess, that kind of completes through Kirk from the two Spocks on either side of him. And he feels the Vulcan Spock instantly relax, as just the tightness in his shoulders just dissolves. And the other Spock, human Spock, says, Kipling's Thousandth Man, and Vulcan Spock says, indeed. And that's a reference to Rudyard Kipling's poem, The Thousandth Man. And we are given a couple of lines out of that poem here, and I'll just read them real quick here from Kipling's Thousandth Man. One man in 1,000, Solomon says, will stick more close than a brother. But the 1,000th man will stand by your side to the gallows foot and after. And that's the dynamic of the story, is the two Spocks, what their relationship is within the one character, and their relationship with Kirk. There's an interesting line in the story somewhere where Kirk is dealing with Vulcan Spock and is always kind of intimidated by the purely Vulcan Spock, and he can talk easier to the human Spock somehow. And he has an exchange with Vulcan Spock, and Vulcan Spock says something to Kirk. I don't remember what it is, but Kirk is immediately ashamed of himself for not believing that the Vulcan Spock was as much his friend as the human Spock. A lot of good stuff in the story. All right, so now let's, before we move on to Mindsifter, the second and last story we'll look at, let's look at some of the artwork from that original fanzine that went along with the story in the fanzine. Does not appear in the New Voyages book. Now, there are 4 illustrations for this story by 2 different artists, so we'll just look at them here 2 by 2. And these first 2 here are by fan artist Debbie Collin, and she signed all of her work as D.L. Collin. And she was an active artist in a lot of the fanzines through the 70s, but you could even find some of her stuff online that's dated around 1998. And Quartet was just one of the fanzines that her art would appear in. Now, I should say here that I don't believe that any of these illustrations for Nevar were drawn specifically for the story. I think these were drawings that had been submitted to Quartet to be used for anything, or were drawn for other specific stories in other fanzines, not specifically for this one story, and there's some reasons for that. One is that if you look at the illustration on the left, that's the title page, we see Spock looking in two different directions, and that makes sense in regards to the story itself, one being completely human, one being completely Vulcan. Now, I should say, I forgot to mention, when they are divided, both human and Vulcan versions of Spock look exactly the same. So they both have the pointed ears and the same yellow pallor to their complexion, those kinds of things. Internally, though, they're completely different. One has green blood, one has red blood, things like that. Don't know why the ears and things wouldn't change, but I guess it's important for the story point that while their division is being kept secret, no one could tell the difference just by looking at them. So if one didn't have pointed ears, the cat's out of the bag, I guess. But as I say, this first illustration here on the left makes sense to begin with. But if you look carefully, the illustration of Spock on the left, you can see behind him what looks like the obelisk from the Paradise Syndrome. And if you look carefully behind the Spock on the right, you see what looks like the wedding ceremony set from Amok Time. So those were obviously for two different things, not having either of them to do with Nevar, with those backgrounds, but they just used them as available artwork for the fanzine here. But the real tell here is the illustration on the right, which we see that diagonal composition there with Spock's face down in the bottom corner, and then this weird goblet thing up in the upper left corner. And that appears to be an illustration from a Kraith story. Now, Kraith was a series of stories written by Jacqueline Lichtenberg, who we talked about earlier. She wrote a series of Vulcan stories called Kraith that often referred to some Vulcan rituals, and this goblet here, as we see illustrated, features in some of these Vulcan ceremonies. And so it was a recurring object in some of those stories. I've never read any of them, but this illustration here was clearly illustrated for one of those stories in another fanzine, just used here opportunistically. Now, these next two illustrations, same thing. Obviously, just generic illustrations that can be used in any story featuring Kirk and Spock. But these two particular illustrations were by the fan artist G. Moaven. And these are, I think, pretty obvious, just generic illustrations that got picked up, again, opportunistically for the story here. And then another reason for that is if you were going to have original illustrations for a story, I don't think it would be usual or advisable to have two different artists illustrating the same story. Anyway, so obviously the one on the left, Kirk with the Enterprise behind him, could be used in any story featuring Kirk and or the Enterprise. And then the same with Spock there on the right. That's a pretty generic picture of Mr. Spock. And in this particular case, it's on the very last page where we have that quote from the Kipling poem. Now, I'll put my art director's hat on here for just a minute to talk about fan art in general, and I guess these examples specifically. But these are obviously not professionally illustrated here by any means. The style and execution, pretty crude and, to my eye at least, untrained. And so they are pretty rough. But you have to look at it from a fan's perspective. And when I first saw these in the fanzine, even though I only got these a few years ago, these fanzines, I didn't see them back in the day. But I've seen enough fan art over the years to just know that the drawings by these artists are coming from the heart, out of their love for the characters and for the show. And in a lot of cases, they're using direct reference photos and things that we're pretty familiar with already, and in many cases they're probably tracing them and then trying some things they may either have seen or heard about, like pointillism in that the last pair of images that we just looked at, or those weird kind of brush pen strokes in the first couple of examples. Things like that are just not done by a trained illustrator. But it doesn't matter. The stories themselves that they're illustrating are not written by professional writers, hence all the editing and cleanup for the new Voyages here. But they are written and drawn from the heart and out of love and respect for this favorite show of all of theirs that they just could not get enough, and are almost called upon to create their own new Star Trek adventures, stories, and artwork and scenes and things like that. So that's my general commentary on the style of the artwork and the professionalism of that. It's all fine for this world, I think. Let me know what you think in the comments down below if you like fan art, as crude as it may be. Sometimes it's great. You'll have a lot of fan artists that will graduate from fan art into professional art, and there'll be an example coming up shortly here when we talk about the covers. But anyway, let's move on now to Mindsifter. All right, Mindsifter by Shirley S. Maiewski, and was first published in Sharon Emily's fanzine Showcase. And I do not have a copy of that to compare it to the edited version in the New Voyages. I had the benefit of having the first story, Nevar, in both versions, not this one. However, I have read that Maiewski was very upset when she got the finished result when the book was published and saw how they had edited and, in her mind, destroyed her story that she was very proud of, that was as it was printed originally in the fanzine. And she kind of became an advocate for warning other fan writers to read the fine print, that whenever their work is going to be picked up professionally, just watch out, because if you don't make some kind of agreement or have a chance to review it or rewrite it yourself or whatever, they could ruin your baby. And that's what she felt that had happened. Now, as we said before, this book had to be put together in 30 days, and Culbreath and Marshak reached out to all the authors, letting them know how quickly this needed to be edited and put together. We'll take care of it if you trust us to edit things for you. If you can't do it or don't want to do it or don't have time within the 30 days, but it's gotta happen. So there's that aspect to it. There's just the real world reality there that could be fan fiction writers just don't understand the real publishing world. So I think there might have been some of that going on. But interesting is that I think it was in the 80s or 90s that Maiewski met James Cawley of the fan-produced Star Trek, the webisodes, Star Trek Phase 2 and Star Trek New Voyages, it was called at different times. And he met her, and they were discussing this particular incident here where she was unhappy with how her story had been handled, and gave James Cawley a copy of the original manuscript and asked if he ever gets to produce his fan-based webisodes, if that ever happens, could he take her story and treat it with the proper respect and restore her original vision to it. And unfortunately, she passed away before Cawley was able to start putting together his own production. But they did wind up doing that in 2013 or 14, I think. They finally produced the episode Mindsifter based on, supposedly, the original manuscript. Now, I'll leave a link to it down below because it's pretty interesting. I have some issues with some of the casting in the episode, but we do see it brought to life visually for the screen in this interpretation here. And in my viewing of it, I don't think it's that different from the story that we do have reference for in New Voyages, the book here. There are some differences, and we'll get into that here. But the story itself is the Mindsifter refers to the Klingon Mindsifter that we saw in one episode only. But the Klingons are trying to learn the secret of the Guardian of Forever, and they know that Kirk knows this. There have been a bunch of other stories in this book about shore leaves, 3 in a row, and then actually Mindsifter is the 4th story in a row. It's not a shore leave story in itself, but the Klingons capture Kirk while he's coming back to the ship from shore leave all by himself. That's where they grab him, and spins off of a shore leave episode that we don't really know anything else about, other than the Klingons nab him. And then they run him through the Mindsifter and find out at least where the Guardian of the Galaxy is. And they take him there, and they're going to force him to teach them how to operate it. Well, apparently the Guardian of Forever only listens to Kirk. They're not going to listen to the Guardian will not listen to the Klingons somehow. We don't get into that too much at least in the edited version here in the book form. Might go into it more in the original manuscript, don't know. We don't really see it. Well, we see it touched on in the James Cawley webisode version. You can watch that for yourself. But anyway, Kirk somehow falls through the Guardian of Forever and winds up, as the Guardian is replaying Earth history, in the 1950s. And his mind has been stripped, and he's somewhat amnesiac. He remembers certain things, but he's been given post-hypnotic suggestions through the Mindsifter that if he hears or tries to say his name and rank, he just goes into horrible torture and pain and agony. And so when he finds himself in this condition on Earth in the 1950s, he's thrown into a straitjacket and into a loony bin. And that's where the story starts. There is one character, Jan Hamlin, who is a nurse, who is the only person at this asylum that has any compassion for Kirk at all. So she's trying to work with him, and she sees potential. She sees when he seems to be getting better, but then the orderlies and interns and other people there that don't respect the patients of the asylum treat him badly, beat him up, kick him, torture him. They don't give him food or water when the staff isn't watching after them properly. And so she is there for Kirk, who she calls Jimmy. He was able to get James out one time before he flipped out. So rather than John Doe, he is now James Doe on the record. So that's where the story starts out. He will be eating in the cafeteria, and all of a sudden a buzzer goes off, signaling that it's the end of visiting hours or something, and he jumps up, red alert, and he tries to run down the corridors trying to find the turbo lift to get to the bridge. I got to get to the bridge. Help me. Where is it? Where's the turbo lift? And so they just wrap him up again in a straitjacket, throw him in a rubber room. And so that's what he's dealing with. So that's part of the story here. And then we then are splicing back and forth between Kirk in the asylum and Spock and McCoy and the Enterprise crew in their own time, trying to figure out what happened to Kirk and can they possibly find him. And time is passing by. Weeks are going by. Months are going by. And at one point, Starfleet just has to decide that he's gone. He's MIA. He's probably dead. Kirk, of anybody, would have found some way to get through this if he was still alive. He can't possibly be alive. So they give command of the Enterprise to Spock. And one of the interesting things in the story for me when I first read this back all those years ago was Spock showing up in the gold command tunic with the proper braids of the captain's rank on the sleeves and the star and the little Delta emblem instead of the little, whatever that atomic symbol or the little torus shape on the science uniform that Spock usually wears. But Spock's blue shirt is gone, and now he's wearing Kirk's shirt. And McCoy is very upset with Spock. They're getting along worse than ever because McCoy is blaming Spock for giving up on Kirk, and he was just in this thing the whole time just to get command. Spock is trying to say, you know me, you know I never wanted command. That's what you said. So there's a lot of that dynamic going on, but Spock is thinking and working, and he heard Kirk call out when he was being tortured by the Mindsifter. Again, that telepathic link somehow between the two characters, and Spock was getting flashes. So he has something to work from. And so Spock is able to then eventually piece together what has happened here. And the story itself is very strong. We get to see Kirk trying to resurface from his tortured mind, and the one person he can reach out to, she is held at bay by the staff and administration, and it's just very well done. Now, there's a couple of problems that I had with the story, and one of them is that Spock at some point does figure out that he's back in the 1950s because he has seen some newspaper clippings. Have you seen this man? Where at some point a reporter came in and took pictures of Kirk, trying to figure out who this guy is. No one's coming forth to claim him, and he's obviously a dynamic individual, you might say, from flashes that they see when he is somewhat rational. So they put him in his original gold tunic that they found him in and take pictures of him and print those in the newspaper, hoping that someone can find them. And then in the future, Spock is able to reclaim these newspaper clippings on the computer that I think he probably recorded through the Guardian of Forever at one point, so he has access to those somehow. So they decide, okay, we're going to go back in time and pull him out of that asylum. He's already been there for a year. God knows what kind of a treatment or care they've got. He could be dead by now. We don't know. Well, you're going back in time. Can't you just go back in time to the point when he first arrived on Earth in the 1950s, before he's captured by the asylum or the men in the white suits? Can't they go back there? Or can't they go back to the Shore Leave planet where before the Klingons nabbed him? Can't they do that? So there's always that problem with time travel. If you're going to go back and fix it, why are you always locked into that 1 minute that allowed the whole story to get as bad as possible before you go and rescue the guy? Now, I will say that in the James Cawley version, the Star Trek Phase 2, link again down below if you want to watch it, that scene is a little different. In that case, they're having to use the Guardian of Forever to go back in time, which only plays time in a certain way. That resolves at least, or at least locks them into having to go back to that specific moment in time to rescue Kirk. But I don't think, if that's the only difference between the original manuscript and the one that was edited for New Voyages, I don't think that destroyed the story. And I can see from reading the original Nevar manuscript and then reading the edited version how tightened up and improved that it was in New Voyages. So there's that. So I guess you'll have to judge on your own. But very strong story, Mindsifter. I'll leave that link down below if you want to watch it. It's fun to watch if you can deal with the casting in it and some of the acting and some of the production values. It's pretty good in a lot of ways. Their special effects are very good. The use of the music and everything, they really tried to emulate the original series, obviously. It even starts off with the NBC Peacock in living color. Check it out for yourself. Now, before we go here, we'll look at the illustrations that for the original fanzine publication were created specifically for Mindsifter, and you'll see why right away. Again, we've got 4 illustrations, and we'll look at them 2 by 2 here again. But all 4 of these were illustrated, again, by D.L. Collin, who did those first 2 illustrations for the Nevar story that we just looked at here. And so on the left, we see here's Kirk all curled up in a fetal position. He is not in a straitjacket, but he's been severely beaten and then had to say his name and rank, and that threw him into the tortured pain of that post-hypnotic suggestion, and he just curls up on a floor curls up on the floor here at the institution. It looks like a corridor in the Enterprise. I don't know if that's a little creative license or not, because that's clearly what Kirk is seeing when he's looking at the corridors in the asylum. He's trying to get to the bridge, but these do look like the corridors and turbo shaft doors on the Enterprise, and not what a 1950s hospital would look like, I don't think. But then on the other side here is an illustration of Spock, and even though this is not in color, by the braid on his sleeve, you can tell that he is wearing the command tunic here. He is captain of the Enterprise now officially, and he is studying the computer, and this is where he is finding the old newspaper clippings. And then these last two here are interesting. One of them you might think could be generic. I don't think it is, though. I think it was illustrated specifically for the story here. And that is where we see Scotty and McCoy talking. And they would do this in both versions of the story here, where they're both of them are upset with Spock having taken command and given up on their pal Jim, who is lost somewhere. They don't even know he's back in time. They don't know what's going on. But neither of them and many of the crew don't like the way Spock is running the ship. He's just so cold and unemotional, no compassion, seemingly. And so that's on the left. And then on the right, this is no doubt a representation of Nurse Jan Hamlin in the Star Trek The New Voyages. She is Nurse Jan Hamlin. In the James Cawley webisode Phase 2 version, she is Dr. Jan Hamlin. So don't know whether she was doctor or nurse in the original manuscript. Don't know that for sure, but that's another main difference between the two representations of the same story. All right, now there's just one more section to go here, and that is to look at the book covers, the band of book covers for Star Trek The New Voyages. But before we get into that here in just a minute, there's one thing that I forgot to mention early on that I've never heard anybody else really talk about when they're talking about this book here. But that is that every one of these stories and every one of the drawings and every little bit of editing, all done by women. Everyone involved except for Fred Pohl, the Star Trek editor at Bantam. Everyone else involved in putting this book together was a Star Trek fan, was a woman. And so this is quite a collaboration, I think, back in those days. I don't know if most, if not all, of the fan fiction that was coming out in those fanzines were all women writers or not. I suspicion that they can't be 100% women, but it might have been more common than not in those days. I'm not sure of that. Maybe you know. If you do know about that, maybe mention it in the comments and we can start a little dialogue about that. I don't know that much about the original fanzines other than what I've looked into for this video. But there you have it. Now let's move into the cover art for this book, and there were 3 editions that came out, at least cover art wise, and we'll take a look at those and then we'll wrap things up. Now I'm putting several covers up here all at once because these are all illustrated by fan artist S. Fantoni, and the book we're talking about here, The New Voyages, is the 4th from the left, or the penultimate cover art that we see on this page here. But I'm putting the other ones up just so you can see his Star Trek chops here. All very similar, but he originally was a fan artist. S. Fantoni is a pseudonym that he went by, and later on he went by Eddie Jones, his real name. S. Fantoni, I think, because he was a fan artist, he came up with that name. I don't know that for sure, just a suspicion. But you can see that he did 3 9, 10, and 11 of the James Blish adaptation covers, and those came out before, you can see by the years along the bottom there, before New Voyages, and then after New Voyages he went on to do the cover for The New Voyages 2, which came out a couple years later. And then these last 2 covers I'll just put up next to each other, and we'll talk about them at the same time while you're taking a look at both of them together. On the left is the Bantam Spectra edition that came out in 1985, and the cover artist or designer here is uncredited. But this came out around that time. Bantam was re-releasing all of their Star Trek books with a similar typography, so they would all look similar on the shelves together. And that new letter font there that we're looking at there was common to all of them. The cover artwork itself is obviously incorrect. This is during the motion picture era, and clearly all the stories in the book are reflective of the original series and the first 5-year mission. They all took place during that time frame and not after the refit of Enterprise. Still a pretty nice looking cover, I think, even though I tend to nitpick on little things like that. I'm just a damn art director by trade, and so we like to pick things apart when we get any chance to at all. But now if we move over to the right and we see this, I think, a pretty cool wraparound cover here from the Bantam Spectra 1996 edition, illustrated by Kazuhiro Sano. And this was a time in 1996, around then, that Bantam was once again redesigning their entire Star Trek line of books and unifying them again. And I believe Sano did all the illustrations for every one of those covers back then. And in most cases, I think this is probably one of his best covers, really. In most cases, and I did a video about this before, about another Star Trek series, where he would take pretty recognizable screen captures or studio shots or whatever that we've seen a million times and just painted versions of them, put them into montages with a ship or two in the background. Maybe he would add a planet or a starburst or something into it, maybe a galaxy swirl. But they were all recognizable from source material. In this particular case, he's stepped it up a little bit because he's got a few examples in the cover here that reflect things happening in the specific stories. For instance, on the front cover there, you see the Enterprise, and there's that explosion on the nacelle. I believe that is representing the story Intersection Point, where the Enterprise collides with that interdimensional rift, and it breaches the hull. Now, it's supposed to be the engineering hull. I think that Sano probably didn't understand really the anatomy of the ship, so he put that breach on the nacelle rather than on the engineering hull. But still, it was intentionally done to represent a story point from one of the stories inside. And then down in the corner there, we see Spock's nymph that he met in the enchanted pool, just dressed in the leaves and twigs and things that she could find to clothe herself in from the woods and the forest there. And then on the back, we see a fairly standard representation of a Klingon ship shooting some kind of a ray out of the front. That specifically doesn't happen in the story, but I would assign this particular image here to Mindsifter, which did have a heavy Klingon influence to it. So we put that all together, and then we have a nice shot of Kirk and Spock on the cover there. And every one of the stories in this book here, Kirk and Spock obviously featured very prominently. And there you have it, folks. That was a bit longer than I expected it to be, just talking about 2 short stories. But I guess when you talk in depth about any story, it might as well be a novel. So sorry about that. I know I'm keeping you up late. It's late on the night before 4th of July. I know you want to get to bed before Uncle Sam comes sliding down the chimney. So I'll let you go now. But before that, a little call for any comments. If you got any particular stories that you liked in the New Voyages, have you read the New Voyages? Let me know down below. Do you have a favorite Star Trek book by Bantam or later Pocket books? Let me know. Any favorite artists, Star Trek artists? Let me know what you think about the fan fiction and fan art. Let's chat about stuff like that. That's why we're here. So with that, I will let you go. And until we get to take off to the final frontier once again, thanks a lot.